Hi everyone, Heather here with astrolotta.com, and today I'm here with a new video, and this one's kind of an interesting one. I think it's going to be kind of fun for me. I'm going to be talking about remedies for difficult Neptune transits specifically. And the reason that I've chosen Neptune transits is for a couple of different reasons. For one, I myself have a lot of Neptune afflictions in my birth chart. And so this is actually remedies for Neptune difficulties in the birth chart as well as Neptune transits, right? And so I have a lot of difficult Neptune aspects in my own birth chart that I've worked through, that I've done different remedies for. So I've tested, these are tried and true. And I've used a lot of these with a lot of my clients as well with success. So, I can speak to the efficacy of a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about with these Neptune transits. I do have remedies for all sorts of, other things that I sometimes recommend to people. I don't always recommend remedies. It depends on the person and the context and the situation. And a lot of times the things that I suggest are very specific to the individual birth chart. So if there's something you're particularly concerned with, you can always book a personal reading with me, or, there are other astrologers that do this type of thing as well, and get a very specific remedy or some practical advice, right, for dealing with these difficult aspects in your birth chart. But for me specifically, I have worked a lot with Neptune in my birth chart, Neptune transits. For my experience, Neptune is one of the most difficult planets in transit, for me especially, but again for everyone, because it's very otherworldly, right? It's not of the earth. It's very intangible, and it's very hard to grasp and understand what is going on when you have a Neptune transit that's difficult in your birth chart. And for those who already have Neptune difficulties in your natal chart, when you have a Neptune transit, that's going to make that even stronger. So the strongest outer planet transits are going to be the ones that are already causing difficulties in your natal chart. And so I believe it was Marina and Lotta that a few weeks ago did a video about transits and things like that. Check that out. But she mentioned how this is true. This is with any planet. So if you have a lot of difficult Uranus energy in your chart, Uranus transits are going to be hard. If you have a lot of really beautiful Neptune energy, all these like trines, you have this exalted Neptune that's like in all these wonderful trines, and it's like elevated in your chart in some sort of way, the Neptune transits are not going to be quite as difficult for you. And you probably won't need these remedies in the same way that other people will. But for most of us, Neptune can be quite confusing. It brings a lot of fog. It brings illusion, disillusionment. And where Neptune shows up in the chart, it shows you where it's very difficult to make things tangible. It shows you where you're more prone to deception because you can't see things quite as clearly. And it sort of dissolves what it touches in terms of physicality. So in the earth houses, or in conjunction or in a square with certain planets, it can be quite difficult to deal with in physical reality. And because Neptune is so energetic and so ethereal and so beyond this realm, it transcends all time, space, dimensional energies, that type of thing. Neptune tends to respond better to subtle remedies like the Bach flower remedies that I mentioned with Lotta in our last video together that everybody was asking about. That's why I wanted to do this video. They're like, what is that remedy that you talked about? And I will discuss, clematis and some of the other Bach flower remedies that I use for Neptune specifically in this video as well. But people were asking about that, and I do find personally that Neptune transits do respond a lot more easily to these energetic remedies than maybe some other things like Saturn, right? Where you have to do the work, right? It's very physical. It's not going to respond as easily to something like a flower remedy. It still will help, but it's not going to help in the same way. It's not going to be as responsive. And so this is just, my interpretation of the energy. This is just what I see and what I have found works for me. This is in no way to be construed as medical advice. I don't know why it would be, because none of this is medical, but just in case, you guys, do your own research, do your own work, especially if you're taking something like a flower essence or anything of that nature. That's pretty much the only thing I'm really going to talk about in relationship to these transits that would be maybe considered a supplement. But yeah, so without further ado, let's get started. So the main thing that happens when you have Neptune in a difficult aspect in your birth chart or in a difficult placement by transit is that it dissolves boundaries. It makes it so you only see what you want to see. It makes it so you're living in this fantasy world. You're wearing these rose-colored glasses, and it makes it very difficult for you to be discerning. It makes it very difficult to deal with what's going on in physical reality. And so, as I mentioned before, if you look where Neptune is in your birth chart in the houses, that shows you where you're not seeing things clearly and where you're going to be more prone to deception. And so if you find yourself with Neptune, let's say in the third house, being lied to and just being very gullible because you receive these words, this language through this like love, compassion, that sort of energy, and you're not understanding really what's going on or reading between the lines or being able to be discerning in that way, then you might need some sort of remedy for that, or you might need to just be more discerning, right? Likewise, if you have Neptune in the 11th house, it makes you much more prone to being deceived by your friends, your social networks, the people that are around you. You can't see them quite so clearly. You see them through this lens of beauty, compassion, and all of that, which is wonderful and lovely, and you can form these deep spiritual bonds with people. But at the same time, you can be more prone to deception, to being lied to having these moments of disillusionment within your networks. And so, this can be problematic. The most difficult placements in terms of the houses with Neptune are going to be in the earth houses. And so when you have Neptune in the second house, I have this one personally, and every time that a client has this in their chart, or if it's coming by transit, they all have the same experience, which is that Neptune dissolves what it touches, right? So it makes your finances it makes it very difficult for you to hold on to your money. It's like money turns into liquid. It flows right through your fingertips. Even when you're trying really hard to have a good solid budget, it's like, where did the money just go? It comes in when you need it, when you have Neptune in the second house. Wherever Neptune is, you can also manifest quite easily just by putting the energy out there. And so this is sort of manifestation energy. I don't like to use that word too much because I think it's a little overdone, but it is, right? And so you can visualize, your resources coming in, and they can come in for you when you need them, but it's usually not more than you need. It's usually it comes in when you need it and it falls away when you don't. But this can be problematic if you're trying to save money, if you're trying to keep track of your budget in a very tangible sort of way. And even if you have all these spreadsheets like I do, it can be difficult to do. And so one of the main remedies that I like to recommend to people who have Neptune in the second house, or who have Neptune transiting the second house, because Neptune transits are very long, so this would be a long process of experiencing this. Anyone who has the second house ruled by Pisces is having a Neptune transit, and they already kind of have this energy, right? The Pisces ruled area of your chart is going to be Neptunian. And so if you're experiencing this where you just for the life of you cannot keep track, the best way to do this is to make your money tangible, to spend money in cash, to save money in a way that's tangible. I personally like to, keep cash on hand and pay everything in as much cash as possible. I know in this day and age, it's very difficult to do that with like bills and things like that because everything's online, but as much as you can, because you need to make the money real. You need to feel it in your hands. You have to do the opposite of the Neptune, right? With this sort of physical energy, you need to be able to hold it, touch it, see it, smell it, give it to somebody else in a physical way. And that is one of the best ways to keep track of your money if you're dealing with a difficult Neptune transit in your second house, or maybe a Neptune-Venus transit or something along those lines, or a Neptune transit to the ruler of your second house. The ruler of your second house is the planet that rules the sign that's on the cusp of the second house. And so these are all different things that you can look for in your chart in terms of that sort of placement. There are, other placements that can be quite difficult as well. Neptune in the sixth house makes it very difficult for you to stick to any sort of solid routine. It can also bring health problems that are very difficult to understand or get diagnosis for. And so, that is problematic in and of itself, but you kind of have to look outside of the box. You have to look to energetic medicine and different energetic forms of diagnosis, even like going to a medical intuitive or something like that can be a little bit more fruitful to somebody who has a minor illness. I wouldn't say to do that, obviously, if you're having something serious going on, but you could too. You can incorporate that as well. I don't see anything wrong with that. But having somebody who has an intuitive ability, who can read the energy or who can work on you energetically, is going to be more fruitful for somebody with Neptune in the sixth house versus with somebody who has Saturn in the sixth house, where they need very physical, like that type of energy, right? And so those are sort of some of the things that can go on there. Neptune in the 10th house can bring a lot of confusion when it comes to your career, and it can make it so you sort of idealize authority figures in your life and you can't see them quite so clearly, and you end up being manipulated. You end up becoming overly obligated to your job, and to the people, the hires up in your, corporation or in your business and things like that. And if you are in that higher up position, you can become overly obligated when it comes to dealing with the people below you, right? Like your employees and things like that. And so you need to be able to do something that helps you to say no. And so there's a couple different remedies for that. First and foremost, let's talk about the difficulty saying no and becoming overly obligated when you have a difficult Neptune transit. This can also happen when you have Neptune in a square with Mercury. It can happen a little bit but with Mars. People who have Neptune in square with Mars, they tend to get really caught up in other people's excitement about something, and then they end up acting on their will, the other person's will, because of their passion and excitement, because they get caught up in it. They feel it, right? It's very empathic in that way. And then instead of acting on their own volition, and so they'll do something, and then like a couple days later, the sort of fantasy falls away, and you're like, why did I do that thing? It was because my friend was so excited about it, right? And so all of these issues, right, are boundary related issues. And so I'm going to talk about some of the Bach remedies that work in my personal experience for these things. If you are someone who has by transit or in real life a Neptune conjunction or square, especially, even opposition can do this to a certain extent to Mars, and you have a difficulty you get excited about somebody else's thing, and then it sort of throws you off track. It throws you off of your own sort of direction. Walnut is a really good remedy for this. It's also really good if you are having difficult Uranus transits for certain people in certain situations, but I'm going to hold this up here. Walnut is a Bach flower remedy that I like to utilize for that. This is an aspect I have in my chart, and I do have this, I get excited about somebody else's thing, and it does throw me off. And so if I find myself in that sort of mode of excitement, and I'm not sure if it's my own excitement or what's going on there, I like to take the walnut. It brings me back down to earth. And just before I get into some of these other ones, this is a book that I highly recommend for people who are interested in the Bach flower remedies. Hopefully it's not backwards in the screen. I'll check it when I'm reviewing this, but it's just the Encyclopedia of Bach flower remedies. I got this on Amazon. It's really awesome. It's a reference guide. You can kind of go through and see what all the remedies are and which ones that you would like to use for yourself. Bach is not the only one that makes flower essences and flower remedies. You can make them yourself. I'm in an herbalism class right now locally, and we use, we forage wildcraft, take herbs in a sustainable sort of respectful way. And, we just made a flower essence in the last class. And so you can make flower essences from everything. There's desert flower essences. There's, it's not just the Bach remedies, but these are the most commonly known. And anyway, so if you find yourself caught up in somebody else's excitement, you don't have boundaries in that way, walnut's really good. It's really good for transitional phases in life and keeping you sort of focused and on track. The ultimate Bach remedy for if you just can't see things clearly, if you're in a fantasy world, if you can't keep your feet on solid ground, and this is very common for all Neptune transits to Mercury, to Mars, to the sun, to the moon, especially to the ascendant, to the descendant, right? Everywhere that Neptune touches, it's going to make things a little foggy and unclear, but it's going to have you like in this sort of haze in these days, and you're not going to be able to be as discerning as you normally can, because you're kind of living a little bit in a fantasy world, and you're seeing what you want to see. And so clematis is really good for that, because it helps you to put your feet on solid ground. It helps you to stay in the present rather than especially if you're feeling spacey. This is really good when you have these transits between Neptune and Mercury, where it's very difficult to keep your feet on solid ground. It's very difficult to be discerning because you're daydreaming and you're off in la la land. It's when you're like focusing on these fantasies of the future, which a lot of times people do, instead of making decisions when they have Neptune squaring their Mercury either in the birth chart or conjunct the Mercury in the birth chart or in transit. it's like you want to fantasize about everything that you want to do, and you have this grandiose vision of what's going to happen, but then you don't do anything, right? You don't make a decision, you don't act on it. And this could be with Mars as well. And so this can help you to take that vision and to ground it into reality and to be in the present while also looking to the future, because these visualization capabilities, this creativity, that's wonderful, and it is very useful and very helpful, but it's only useful if you're able to actually take that and turn it into something, right? Otherwise, it's just a fantasy. And so clematis is really good for that. It's also really good, as we mentioned in that previous video, for if you can't see your relationships clearly. That's another one. If you have a Neptune on the descendant, Neptune in conjunction or in square with Venus, those types of things, this could be a really good remedy in that respect as well. Another one too, going back to, Neptune Mercury. Neptune Mercury is a very difficult one. It's actually happening in the skies right now as I'm recording this. I'm not sure if I'm uploading it while that's happening. I might wait a week, but it's happening as I'm recording this, which is part of the reason why I wanted to record this video. But that can make it very difficult to make decisions because it's very confusing. It feels like I don't know what decision to make. I don't know, up and down and left and right, and it feels right and then it doesn't. And then there's also this sense when you have a square, especially from Neptune, or a difficult Neptune transit, there's this sense, like this ominous energy, like something's about to happen, and it feels unsettling, but then nothing actually happens. And so that's one of the things. It's just a weird sort of thing that happens with these Neptune transits. I've noticed it, my clients have noticed it. And so it makes it so you're afraid to make a decision even, and it's probably a good thing, right? Because you're maybe not seeing things and understanding things quite as clearly. But if you're having difficulties with decision making, there's a couple different remedies that work well for that. Curado, I'm not sure how to pronounce this one specifically. This is good for trusting your intuition in making decisions. And so it instills decisiveness when you question your own judgment or ask others for advice. And so when you can't make a decision, you're getting an astrology reading, and then a tarot card reading, and then a psychic reading, and then you're asking your best friend, and then you're going out and, using your divination rods, and you can't make a decision because you have to constantly second guess it and get all this affirmation instead of trusting your own gut and your own judgment, which can happen when you're in this confused state. And this could also be the case if you have your Neptune in the third house, or Neptune transiting the moon. That could be another one, because it does sort of, it can make you more intuitive, but it can also make it confusing, right, to understand what is trying to come through there. So that's another one that I find is good for certain Neptune aspects and transits. And then if you're just kind of stuck between two decisions and that's the confusion, this one right here, it's called Scleranthus. This one is really good for when you're torn between two options. And so that's another one that I like to use. I do have Neptune squaring my natal Mercury. I actually have it in a T-square with Mercury and Mars. And so for me to make a decision and then act on it, there's a lot of second guessing. There's a lot of confusion that goes on, a lot of distrust of my own, inner guidance and that kind of thing. And then somebody else will tell me something if I ask them advice, and I'll get really excited about that. And then I'll just go off and do that thing, right? And so I need a lot of help there sometimes. So all of these have been good allies for me in navigating that energy. And so let's see, what else do we have here for Neptune? So stones that can help with Neptune. I'm not big on using all these crystals all the time everywhere. I do have some that I use. I have, this is a red coral that I use to strengthen my Mars. I also have a debilitated Mars, not just by Neptune. And so when you work with gems and crystals in astrology as remedies for certain planetary energies, first off, consult someone who's a professional before you do that, just because you might be making things worse. And it needs to be something very specific. If you Google it online and then you're like, okay, this is the remedy for Saturn, you might get too much Saturn, right? And so if that's happening and you're having a Saturn transit and then you take a Saturn, gem, it's too much Saturn. You might just make things harder on yourself. Same thing with Mars. Mars ones, because it's technically a malefic planet, that can be difficult too. So make sure that you know that you need this and that this is appropriate for you in your specific chart. I'm not somebody who does crystal remedies very much or anything like that, but there are plenty of astrologers that do that. But when you do a remedy, you know, with crystals, you do want it to be able to, the energy has to get through to your skin. And so if you are able to see what's going on here, see how there's a hole in the bottom here on this ring? That's so that way the energy of the red coral can pass through and reach my actual finger. If there is metal on the bottom of this, it's going to be blocked, right? So it's not going to work as effectively. So you want it to be able to touch your body, or at least to pass through to your body. And so you want to look for something really specific. And so for obviously Neptune, grounding stones are going to be very helpful for you. And so things like red jasper, or even maybe like tiger's eye or something like that, something where that's very earthy and heavier in that respect. If you're having boundary issues and you're feeling like you're absorbing everybody else's energy, like you might be when you have Neptune transiting your sun or your moon or your ascendant or something like that, that's a really good time to use tourmaline. And so this is a nugget of black tourmaline right here. This one's really good for just absorbing and grounding out negative energy. It's very, very grounding. It's a very heavy stone, and this is a very commonly used one. So this one can actually be really good too. For, you know, Neptune stuff, especially if you feel like you're having energetic boundary issues specifically. And so, yeah, those are a lot of the things that work really well. If you do feel like you're floating off into the ethers, another thing that, you know, you could always do is eat more grounding foods, go outside, put your feet on the ground, feel things in a very physical, tangible way, because that's going to really bring you back into the sensory experience, bring you back down to earth, especially if you're feeling that sort of free-floating anxiety, that sort of ominous energy that sometimes comes with these Neptune transits. Just being outside and being present in the moment, putting your feet on solid ground, feeling something, touching something, tasting something, smelling some sort of aromatherapy like essential oils or something like that, those types of things can really bring you back down to earth and bring you into the present moment. And they can also bring a lot of clarity, because a lot of times when we're having these difficult Neptune transits, we're not here, we're not present, we're somewhere else, we're floating around in outer space, right? And so yeah, so those are some of this is not an all-inclusive list. This is just a few things that I've picked up along the way that work really well for me. I have, you know, stuff like this for a lot of different transits and placements and things like that. But I thought that this one would be interesting to talk about, just given what's going on right now, given what we talked about in that last video. Everybody wanted to know about these remedies, and we're asking more specific questions about them. And so I thought this would be kind of a nice little thing to do. So if you have any specific questions about what's going on in your chart, if you want specific suggestions, of course, you can always book a reading with me. And there are other astrologers that do this as well. And, you know, it's not always that I'm going to give you like a crystal or something like that. It's mostly I'm going to tell you practical advice and show you what's going on so you can understand it better, right? But a lot of times these things can actually help and they can aid you in the process. And so I do think it's important to note that, you know, there is a little woo-woo to it, right? But I find it helpful. So I think that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and, you know, feel free to comment below with questions, send me a message. My reader page is listed in the description below. The link will be there, and I hope you all have a really wonderful day, wonderful week, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.